In counselling, there are several major schools of thought which counsellors use to help their clients. Each different school of thought provides a different framework for understanding the client and different tools for helping them. Now, there isn't one that's better than the others. Different methods will suit different people and different counsellors. So you may be interested in this video if you're looking at getting into counselling, or if you have passed several of the levels and are now thinking about which form you would like to specialise in. In this video, I'll be running you through some of the key schools of thought, their background, how they aim to understand clients' problems, and how they aim to help their clients. So without further ado, let's get started. So this video will be covering different psychotherapy approaches, including the following terms you'll see on the screen. Now, if you're not entirely familiar with all of these terms, or maybe you've just heard of them, then this video will be giving you a quick intro into all of them. So let's get started with psychodynamic therapy. So psychodynamic therapy has its roots in Freudian thought. I'm sure some of you will have heard of Sigmund Freud and his ideas in the early 20th century, which really were the start of public discourse around the topic. Freudian theory was obviously very based in past experiences. The therapist will aim to delve into the subconscious of the client, so that's things that they're aware of that are in the back of their mind but which they're not actively thinking about, and primarily into the unconscious. This is a Freudian idea of memories which we store deep within ourselves, which we are not actively aware of but which influence our actions. So, for example, if someone has a dislike of another person at work and they can't work out why, the therapist might help the client dig through their past, and they might realize that they had a bully at school who looked very similar to this person, and therefore they have a bias against them. Ways that psychodynamic therapy might work is through the use of association. So a client may be encouraged to freely associate different words. I'm sure you've heard of word association games, and therefore they can find out what their brain is unconsciously linking to other words, and this should yield some positive results in terms of better understanding of themselves. Now, Freudian ideas are related to the ego psychology theory, which relates to the id, which is sort of primal urges, the ego, which is the sort of rational self, and the superego, which is the more moral self, which tries to restrain the other two. Another way that psychodynamic therapy tries to help is through breaking down defense mechanisms. These can be things which people have built up over time to help them cope with particular past traumas, which the therapist will try and work through with the client. For example, someone, if they have been, say, bullied, to use the earlier example, may have repressed these memories to try and better cope with them. But this is not a sustainable solution, as the unconscious will potentially affect their future actions, and therefore the therapist will work with them to try and break down these defenses and find better ways to think about the problem. The next school of thought we'll look at is cognitive behavioral therapy, shortened as CBT. This emerged as a combination of the behavioral and cognitive schools of thinking. So the behavioral school you might think of as conditioning. It's the idea that our behavior can be changed based on receiving rewards or consequences. For example, an alcoholic who really struggles with stopping drinking might be placed on a program where they receive certain awards, such as a chip, for going a certain period of time without drinking. The cognitive school of thinking is about patterns of thought and is focused on changing it at the level of thought rather than action. So, for example, if someone constantly has thoughts that they're a worthless person, the cognitive school of thinking would try and correct those thoughts so that when they fail, they don't think they're completely worthless. Next, there's the ABC model, which was developed by Ellis, and this helps in CBT clients to understand how beliefs impact emotional reactions. So the A in this stands for activating event. So this represents a trigger or situation that occurred in your life. B is beliefs in response to the activating event, and these are either rational or irrational. And then there's consequences. So these are beliefs about the activating event, which influence how you feel emotionally and how you then react behaviorally. So, for example, if someone feels very guilty about something in their past, they might then believe, I'm an evil person, and then this might lead them to self destructive behaviors. These irrational methods of thinking are known as cognitive distortions. So, these are negative thought patterns which CBT tries to identify and challenge. So, for example, it could lead to all or nothing thinking. As said in the earlier example, if someone fails, they could then think that they're worthless. It could lead to mental filtering. For example, if you receive one negative review, whereas the rest are positive, you might focus specifically just on that one. And catastrophizing, which is turning a minor issue into a major disaster, for example. Next, there's core statements, which are three core must statements which Ellis identified as being negative as they create unnecessary and unrealistic demands on yourself. So these are I must do well and succeed, the idea that you must always be perfect, pretty much. Then the idea that others must treat me well when you don't actually have control over how others will treat you. And then third, that the world must be fair and just. These are thought patterns which can lead to feeling negative emotions and lead to internalization of pain. The therapist's role in CBT is to be the expert. Their role is to structure the session, to plan it out, and guide the client to work out their problems, but to provide them solutions on how to go off and solve them. So, for example, if someone is very anxious at work, a therapist using CBT might encourage them to have one conversation that week with someone they hadn't talked to before. This can be seen as homework, which can be very helpful for some people, but again, as we'll discuss with later models, it's not for everyone. Next, we move on to dialectical behavioral therapy, and this is a form of CBT. It's particularly focused on all or nothing thinking, which is why it's called dialectical, as that refers to one or the other, and it's particularly useful for those who struggle with emotional regulation. It's particularly focused on increasing pain tolerance and helping people to rationalize the feelings of pain. It incorporates some techniques from mindfulness, which is inspired by Buddhism, and is particularly used for people who suffer from borderline personality disorder, as these people tend to struggle with self destructive behavior and feeling intense emotion very often. It's often used in a group therapy setting, as this can be a way for people to better identify their problems and work them out. Next, there's person centered counselling. This is known by a few names such as humanistic or Rogerian, and it's focused on the idea that people have an inherent desire to grow. As a result of this belief, it focuses on enabling clients to reach their full potential, which is known as self-actualization. In this regard, the expert is not the counsellor, but in fact the client. With this model, it is believed that the client is the expert of their own life and just needs to be given a safe space to think about themselves and to grow as a result. Therefore, it requires the therapist to have a great degree of empathy and to create a welcoming space where the client can feel heard and work through their issues. Positive feedback is a huge part of this, as the counsellor, needs to be encouraging and give positive feedback. They cannot be judgmental of their life choices, for example. Instead, they have to focus on believing that the client knows what's best for them and will eventually try and reach their full potential. Next, there's Gestalt therapy, which is a form of person-centered counseling. In this, clients are encouraged to think about the present. Gestalt therapy is very much about being in the moment and thinking about how feelings occur to you at the time, rather than delving very deeply into your past. It therefore focuses on having a great awareness of yourself and how you are reacting. It's not just a one-way stream of the client talking to the therapist, it goes both ways, and the idea is to build a relationship. Gestalt therapy also considers the field, so it's not just about what is going on in the client's head at the moment, but it's about their external environment as well, and factors such as their cultural background, which may play a part in how they feel about things. Experiments are also a part of it, and the idea of experimenting with different things is something that's important to Gestalt therapy. For example, a client may be encouraged to talk to an empty chair and work out what they would say to that chair if there was a person sitting in it, so they can then later have that conversation better in real life. Next, we come to somatic therapy. Now, this therapy is very focused on the human body and how it interacts with how we think. Whereas other therapies tend to focus more on the brain, how we are thinking, and how this impacts our actions, somatic therapy recognizes that our bodies feel certain emotions. So, for example, if you've ever felt very anxious, you might have noticed a pain in your stomach, or if you have certain health conditions such as asthma or eczema, you might notice those get worse if you are feeling stressed. So therefore, it aims to link the psychological to the physical. In terms of psychological benefits, it can help people who suffer from PTSD or depression by reducing the stress they feel in their body when they are under stress. It can help with physical conditions such as chronic fatigue, as it helps people to work out what they are feeling, gain a better understanding of how their body is reacting to things, and then be equipped with the tools to cope with them better in the future. So that was our video on different therapeutic schools of thought. Hopefully you found it interesting, and if you want to get started with your counselling journey, feel free to head over to astranticonnect.com, where you can get in contact with one of our customer service staff who'll be happy to guide you towards the right course for you. If you're a counsellor who's passed level 4 of the qualification and is looking at specialising, you might again want to head over and talk to one of our staff about getting on to, say, the CBT course. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in another Astranti Connect video.